Every March 1st, I've made it my personal mission to remind Koreans of the diaspora that we come from the land of the tigers, that our ancestors have always resisted the colonizers. On March 1st, 1919 was the Declaration of Independence against the Japanese occupation of Korea. If you didn't know, the Japanese occupied the peninsula of Korea from 1910 to 1945, and this was within our grandparents' generation. So they told us stories of how they had to change their names to Japanese ones and how they had to essentially speak Japanese and horrible other things. Another reason why today is so significant is because Venus is stationing to go retrograde in the sign of Aries, which has a signature of resistance and activism, especially for women and femmes. The last time Venus was retrograde in the sign of Aries was in 2017 after the Women's March in DC as an act of protest to Donald Trump's first presidency. And if you remember that one, I was at that one. Women were wearing pussy hats. So in that vein and in that energy, I wanted to highlight Yu Guan-sun. She was a 16-year-old student who kind of became the face of this independence movement. Women and young girls who were students at the time, they became such a huge part of this grassroots movement because just imagine, like, you're going to school, you're educating yourself, and then an occupying force comes in and forces you to become comfort women. If you don't know what that means, it's trafficking. Look it up. Over 2 million Koreans showed up. And that's a big deal because Korea is a pretty small peninsula. Yu and her classmates are detained by Japanese authorities, but missionaries from her school are able to negotiate their release. She goes back to her hometown, but she starts smuggling copies of the Declaration of Independence to her village to get more people in the movement. Now, she is a Sag stellium. She has her sun, Mercury, and Venus all in the sign of Sagittarius. So I think this is very symbolic of what she does. On March 31st, she climbs to the top of Mount Maebong and lit a beacon fire, signaling to protesters that the time had come to make their stand. The next day, in her hometown, 3,000 people gathered on a marketplace, and she starts handing out Korean flags, and people start chanting, "Long live Korean independence." Of course, the Japanese military come in and they shut down the protests. They fire into the crowd. They killed 19 people, including her parents. At this point, her parents both have been murdered. She's 17 years old. She's incarcerated, and they offer her a lower sentence if she agrees that she is guilty, which she does not. So then she is tortured to death in prison. But shortly before she dies of her injuries, she writes this: "Even if my fingernails are torn out, my nose and ears are ripped apart, and my legs and arms are crushed, this physical pain does not compare to the pain of losing my nation. My only remorse is not being able to do more than dedicating my life to my country." At the age of 17, on September 28th, 1920, she dies of her injuries. The Japanese occupation in Korea ended August 1945, which is also a Venus and Aries retrograde cycle, and also the end of World War II. Unfortunately, though, the US kind of swooped in, and that was the beginning of their occupation of the peninsula. And that is why our struggle for liberation is intertwined with the liberation of Palestine and other occupied lands, because 1948 really was when the US really started to expand its hegemony in Asia. Oh God, not me getting emotional. My intention for sharing our ancestral history is to remind Koreans of the diaspora that our ancestors resisted so that we could fulfill our destinies, which ultimately I believe is to connect the dots, and how if all of our oppression is interconnected, so is our liberation. In the energy of Venus and Aries, I hope you remember your worth and your value and what is worth fighting for.